Bill, thank you very much. I do appreciate that. We appreciate Huntington Ingalls where I am. It's the largest private employer in Mississippi with about 12,000 people. And I would say when I look back at Katrina, one of the things that you recognize is the private sector rebuilt Mississippi. Federal government was extremely helpful. Our state partners were unbelievable. Virtually every state in the country sent things like National Guard and helicopters and everything else. But at the end of the day, the coast has come back bigger and better than it ever was before because of the private sector. And your company and many others have been leaders in that. I want to say thank you. You know, I've been around a long time in politics, and my introductions have gotten where more and more stuff gets left out. My first government job was in 1969. I got asked to run the census in Mississippi. I was just a pup, and but it was a great lesson for me. I learned a lot about government, and one of the things I learned, government's really not so good at communicating. I'll never forget one Saturday we were down in the state census headquarters, and you may not know the census is not just a census of population, it's a census of housing, census of agriculture, census of business. Well, we were looking through these business census forms, this mom and pop operation from up in Iuka in the northeast corner of the state. I mean, they had struggled with the business census forms, only one page, 14 questions. Is all that about 99.99% of businesses have to fill out. Well, these, you could tell they were good folks. I mean, they had tried hard, but they had struggled. They got down to about number 8, and the question was number of employees broken down by sex. Well, in answer to that, none broken down by sex. We do have 2 with a drinking problem. So I'm going to try to improve. I'm going to try to improve on those government communications as we go forward here today. But I am tickled to be here. I'm tickled to be here because what you're doing in the Commonwealth of Virginia is something that we tried to do in our state with I would unabashedly say some pretty good success when I was elected governor, and we had what we called initially Blueprint Mississippi. I should tell you, it was done by the State Chamber of Commerce during the campaign in which I beat the incumbent governor. And despite that, we worked together, as I hope y'all will do in Virginia with whoever gets elected, to try to make this a success, because it had been a long time in our state since we had had a long-term economic development strategy and a structure to try to put that strategy into effect. Now, Barry asked me, he said, before we really get into that, would I touch on just the national scene for a second? And I know you've heard from an economist, I know you heard from Larry, I know you heard from Senator Warner, so you don't need to hear much from me, but I will make one point about where we are electorally and politically in the United States today. We're about where we were last year. This is a very close election in a very divided country. It wasn't just close because everybody's gathered together in the middle. It's close because equal numbers of people are pretty dang far apart. And we've got the same president. We've got the same majority in the Senate, about the same size. Got the same majority in the House for the other side, about the same size. So we've still got some very difficult problems to deal with. I would say to you it was not only close and stand pat, there's no mandate in this election, because this was an election more than most that we've ever seen in our country that was very negative. And if the incumbent doesn't run on his record, but instead runs on what's wrong with the other guy, it's very hard to fashion a mandate out of that. But President Obama won, and his mandate is to lead. He's earned the right to lead the country. But those who would say, well, this is a mandate to raise taxes, or this is a mandate to do this, or a mandate to do that, I would take issue with that. And for political guys like me, it's my 12th presidential campaign, 44 years. I dropped out of college in 1968 to run 30 counties for the Republicans in Mississippi. By the way, the first time I ever saw a political poll, 1968, 6% of people in Mississippi identified themselves as Republicans. 6. So when people tell me things aren't looking too good, I just tell them, let me tell you what bad really looks like. But there is a clear lesson here. Negative campaigns still work in America, and an attack unanswered is still an attack admitted. So for those of you over here at the legislative table, if somebody attacks you, straighten it out fast, unless it doesn't matter, unless it's an attack on an issue that's irrelevant to the public. But with that, let's talk about Blueprint Mississippi, Virginia here, if I can help on that. You may not realize it, but Mississippi is a very diverse state. Most people think, that we raise cotton and got some ports down on the Gulf, and that's about it. Actually, we share a lot with Virginia. We have a very significant defense industry, not just Huntington Ingalls, but we have foreign companies in our state like EADS that make helicopters, and BAE from Great Britain that makes cannons in our state. Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon. We've got a very large defense industry, and we have 4 very significant military facilities. Keesler Air Force Base, Meridian Naval Air Station, Columbus Air Force Base. 2 of those are training facilities. One of them is a technology facility. And finally, the Corps of Engineers has its principal experiment station in the United States at Vicksburg, Mississippi. We're very worried about the sequester. We've already had a $500 billion cut in the defense budget, legislative, and if the sequester cuts us another 400 and something billion, as would happen if we go over the cliff and it's carried out, it have a huge adverse effect on our economy. Additionally, we have a large manufacturing base. We have a lot of distribution, not just around Memphis, where we have not only FedEx, but all the Class 1 railroads all serve Memphis, and so it's a big transportation. We have 2 ports on the Gulf of Mexico, and we have 2 great waterways. The Mississippi River runs down the west, and the Tennessee-Tom Beaver Waterway runs down the east. So logistics and transportation, a big part of my state's economy. In the last 10 years, we've had 2 new automotive plants built in our state by Nissan and Toyota. That we have now way over 10,000 people directly involved in automotive manufacturing. And I will suggest to you, this didn't just happen accidentally. We are not like Virginia in one way. We don't have a Northern Virginia. We don't have a big part of the state that has growth driven by the federal government, though the federal government is an important part of our economy, as I mentioned on the defense side. But I would suggest to you that even as Northern Virginia continues to be a really, really important part of your economy, that it's very important to make sure that that isn't the only thing that drives your economy. That this organization's job is to make sure that from Bristol to the Tidewater and everywhere north of there, that we're having economic development everywhere and in very different kinds of ways. So In 2003, I ran for governor. Ran against an incumbent Democrat, very nice guy, and the issues were lawsuit abuse. Mississippi had been named 3 years in a row by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce the worst state in the country for lawsuit abuse. It was causing doctors to leave the state. In the next county over from me, the county hospital closed the emergency room at the hospital because they couldn't pay their medical liability premium. So it was a serious healthcare problem. But that wasn't all. Every small business in Mississippi was one lawsuit away from bankruptcy. That was a big issue in my campaign. I mention it because there are going to be specific issues in one state that got nothing to do with the next state. But there are some other big issues that I don't care if you're in California or Connecticut or Mississippi or Virginia that really, really, really matter. And before I really emphasize those, I do want to just mention a couple of other things where we are similar. When I got elected governor, Mississippi had a $720 million budget shortfall. By that I mean we spent $720 million more on current expenses than we took in recurring revenue. Now, anywhere else that'd be called a deficit, except it's unconstitutional to have a deficit in Mississippi. So we called it a budget shortfall. And to give you a little frame of reference, that's 20% of the general fund budget that year. So a little bit like these folks sitting over here from the legislature and Bob McDonald when he came in, similar deal. And you'll see why I mention that in a minute. We'd lost 22% of our manufacturing jobs in the previous 4 years. We had particularly been hit hard in furniture, like part of your state had been. And unlike Virginia, which is probably the highest income state of the South and one of the highest income states in the country, we're the poorest, we're the lowest income state in the country and had been since the census of 1870. So we had to do something about it. And just as McDonald and the legislature, we just took a new tack. And it's interesting, between my election and my inauguration, we had a jobs summit. We had 700 people like you, who were legislators, who were business people, who were, I met the president of the University of Virginia, who were educators. And we talked, what are we going to do? We set priorities based on what was going on in Mississippi at the time. First priority was tort reform. And in my first 6 months as governor, we passed what the Wall Street Journal called the most comprehensive tort reform bill passed by any state in the country. And I can tell you, it wasn't pretty. It was ugly, hard, contentious, divisive, but done. And once it was over, we put it behind us. But that was very important to the business community. I don't think y'all have anything like that. The second thing was we weren't going to raise anybody's taxes. That we were going to get the budget back in balance by getting control of spending. And I can tell you, as my old boss Ronald Reagan used to say, raising taxes is the enemy of controlling spending. You know, I love my legislators, but you give them an extra butt, pal, it's gone. They're going to spend it. You know, that's just what legislators do. They spend it. So we didn't raise taxes, and it took us 2 years to get the budget back in shape. But we did it. The third thing is something else that I bet we have hugely in common with Virginia. We decided we were going to emphasize workforce development and jobs training. The business community told me over and over and over, the biggest problem we got is in human capital, is in the inability to find people who can do the work, and the inability to find people who want to do the work. That we got jobs begging, even though we had, for us, pretty high unemployment, we got jobs begging that aren't that high tech, aren't that high skilled. But for me, more important than just the short-term jobs was the long-term recognition that this problem was going to get worse, not better, if we didn't do something about it. And a lot of these business guys who couldn't find somebody today, and so they weren't getting as far as they want to get, if we didn't do something about the quality of the workforce, they weren't going to be there much longer. I'll never forget, I hadn't been governor a month. I went over to Mississippi State University, our land-grant university, to open the Franklin Center for Furniture Manufacturing and Management. And this little professor from Mississippi State walked up to me and said, you know, Governor, our businesses in Mississippi got three choices. They can innovate, they can immigrate, or they can evaporate. Now that's a pretty cold way of saying, if we can't help our businesses become more productive so that they can stay competitive, that they're going to either leave and go somewhere for cheaper labor, or they're just going to stay in business till they can't squeeze out positive cash flow anymore and they're going to walk away. And he was just so dead right. Because in America, the productivity increases that you got to have to stay competitive, you don't get that by getting your people to work harder. You get it by helping them work smarter. Because I can remember vividly, I went to an aluminum extrusion plant in DeSoto County, owned by a subsidiary of Alcoa. And I went in there and say 200 guys worked in there. I walked around, I met some of them, went in the break room with them. And the place had been there 35 years, and the average employee had worked there 22 years. So it tells you Alcoa's a good employer. But one of them told me, he said, you know, there's not one process on the floor of this factory that's like it was when I came to work here 25 years ago. Everything has changed. Every process has changed. Every piece of equipment's got a computer embedded in it. And I've been trained and retrained and retrained and retrained and retrained. And so we got to get our arms around the fact that workforce training is not one time. That it's lifelong learning. I mean, we've got to continue to upgrade the skills of our workforce so they can deploy and operate the machinery that give you the innovations that let you stay productive so you can stay competitive. And if we can't offer that to employers, they're not staying. But more importantly, we owe it to our working people. You know, the U.S. Department of Commerce did a study, or maybe the Department of Labor, did a study in 1950 about the workforce. It said the American workforce in 1950, 20% of jobs required a 4-year college degree. 20% required what were then considered high skills, and 60% of jobs could be filled by people with low or no skills. Well, some smart guy said, well, let's update that in 2000. Well, it did. Take an interesting thing. In 2000, 20% of the jobs in the American economy require a 4-year college degree. But 65% require what we considered in 12 years ago high skills. And only 15% are available for people with no skills or low skills. And everybody sitting here knows that 15%'s got smaller, and that 65%'s got bigger. Because that's how we stay competitive in the global marketplace. My wife's from Canton, Mississippi. It's a little old town 30 miles from Yazoo City, which is my hometown. When we were growing up, we were trying to be able to compete against the kids from Canton. You know, we judged how we did by whether we beat Canton in football, how we did by, well, my children grew up to have to prepare to compete against kids from Canton, China. Not just Canton, Ohio, but Canton, China. And we got to give them the skills to do that. And we've got to continue to update and update and update and because if you don't, it doesn't take long for it to catch up with you. I'm very proud of the fact that when Toyota chose Mississippi, Toyota was the #1 economic prospect in America in 2007. And they chose to build their new facility in Mississippi, which I'm kind of happy about. But the thing I'm very proud of is Toyota, the first thing out of their mouth when they announced this, we chose Mississippi for the quality of the workforce. Now, when I grew up in Mississippi, people came there looking for strong backs and low wages. And when that kind of wore out, they went on to Mexico or Vietnam or wherever. Well, today people come to Mississippi looking for sharp minds, and they're ready to pay for them. When General Electric Aviation opened its facility at Batesville, Mississippi, that manufactures composite jet engine fan blades and assemblies, whatever that means, the vice chairman of the board of General Electric said, and this is one of the biggest manufacturing companies in the world, they manufacture in more than 100 countries. They said this is the most sophisticated manufacturing General Electric does anywhere in the world. And we're going to do it at Batesville, Mississippi. And since then, they've opened another plant in Ellisville, Mississippi, down in the south end of the state. But the point is, we have improved the quality of our workforce. We have tripled what we spend on skills training. And those of you in business, I don't have to tell you how important it is, but the public has to understand that this is critical to economic growth. It's critical for attracting businesses to Virginia, but it's critical for everybody in Virginia to stay in business, to continue to be, you can like it or not like it, we are in a global marketplace. If you're going to continue to compete, you've got to innovate and you got to have the workers. And I want to finish on this subject by making a point for all of you educators who are here. We must quit stigmatizing skills training in our country. We are... Marcia and I have been married 41 years. We've got 2 boys. Reeves is 33. And I think about 15 years ago, what if Marcia had gone to the beauty parlor and said, Reeves has decided he's not going to go to Ole Miss. He's going to go to the community college and learn a trade. Now, what would they have said? Well, Marcia, what's wrong with you? Mike Huckabee told in an audience like this 4 years ago, we were both speaking, that year in Arkansas, 3 times more high school graduates were going to the university than 25 years ago. And then he said, and this year, the same number of students are graduating from the university as 25 years ago. What about that other 2/3? We're setting them up for failure. They're going to owe $28,000. 48% of college students in Mississippi graduate within 6 years. The other half, we're setting up for failure. They go flunk out. What does that say to themselves about themselves? And then they owe a boatload of money. And part of it is because we told them, you got to do this or there's something wrong with you. An automobile mechanic in Jackson, Mississippi makes $70,000 a year after 5 years experience. $70,000 a year. And yet our schools are telling our young people, you shouldn't go to skills training. You shouldn't do that. This organization needs to be aflame with destigmatizing skills training. If you want to serve your purpose and serve the working people of your state, that's the starting point. The second thing I would say to you that I learned, not from that summit, but as I went along, if the quality of the workforce is the most important thing for bringing in jobs, the second thing is logistics. Logistics makes so much economic difference. We won Toyota because of the quality of the workforce, but we were about to lose them because we weren't logistically as good for them as Chattanooga. And by a couple of things that we did, we got that we changed that equation. Logistics are enormously important for job creation and for industry, as well as for the quality of life of your citizens. You know, what is the single most important commodity in the life of the average American? Why, it's time. It's time. And logistics is all about time. People who would love to get to spend more time with their children, but they're backed up on 66 till the cows come home. You know, people who need to move big units of freight across the country. But we haven't done enough to take care of, expand, promote our railroads. There's a great commercial on TV these days for the U.S. Navy. Got a big old aircraft carrier going along, but it says, among other things, 90% of trade is seaborne. Yet we have some great ports in our country that once you get to inland, it's total constipation. Can't get the cargoes out. We matched with Kansas City Southern. We matched with them $70-something million to open up the rail to 60-mile-an-hour double stack out of the state of Port of Mississippi so that we could solve that problem. The Port of Virginia, I will bet you, has got some version of that problem. Los Angeles and Long Beach got some version of that problem. Logistics matters. I don't care how you cut it, what you do with it, it matters. We had a pretty good little run with we changed the name of our Blueprint Mississippi to Momentum Mississippi. We had a very strong governing board, all private, no government money. The legislature had them testify every time the legislature ever came to town. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What else could we be doing? We brought Toyota to our state, General Electric Aviation, 2 plants. The most modern steel mill in America is in Columbus, Mississippi. The Russian steel giant Severstal built it. It's an overgrown mini mill. Yet 2 years ago, and when the economy was really bad, it sold more steel of their capacity than any other steel mill in America. And that's not true. 95% of the people who work there had never seen a steel mill, much less worked there before they got a job there. Skills training was crucial in every single one of that. As I mentioned, we make helicopters for the U.S. Army, again, taught by our community colleges. So if I can leave you with workforce training and don't back off, and logistics, then the only other thing I would say to you is this doesn't just happen. It's got to be led by somebody or some folks because some of this cuts against the grain, particularly on the skills training thing. So I tell you, plan, target. One of the things that we did in our Momentum Mississippi plan was this. We're going to focus on advanced manufacturing with advanced materials. And then we're going to try to put that into automotive and aerospace. And then separately, we're going to focus on energy. My view about energy is we want Mississippi to be an energy reliable state. 15 years from now, people about energy are not going to say, what does it cost? They're going to ask, can we get it? And we're going to be in a place where you can get it. And we are actually, unlike some politicians, we actually are all of the above. Oil, gas, coal, nuclear, solar. We have a plant that makes windows for office buildings that are dynamic glass. You know how you can buy sunglasses, when the sun comes out they darken, and when it's dark they clear up? Well, they make windows like that, except you can turn a switch and won't do it. Now what does that mean? It means when it's 25 outside and clear, you leave the glass clear and it helps warm up the room. But if it's 95 outside, click the switch and the glass darkens up to 85%, and it saves about 13% a year on an electric bill in an office building. So we really are about all of the above. We have the only facility in the United States that makes gasoline certified by the Environmental Protection Agency to run in automobiles out of wood. Something the Germans did during World War II, and we do it now, and we sell it to little mom and pop operations like FedEx.